afternoon, everybody. My name is Susan Deering, and I'm the Vice President of the Laguna Woods Democratic Club, and I'd like to welcome you all to our July meeting. We are very fortunate today to have an award-winning journalist with us, Norberto Santana, who has written for the OC Register and currently is the founder, publisher, and editor for the Voice of OC, which is a nonprofit newsroom in Orange County. What we will be doing today is I will introduce Norberto, and then in addition also our secretary of our Democratic Club, Allan Feldman, and they will participate in a dialogue about the role of nonprofit journalism in today's political climate. We have members of the Democratic Club on this Zoom call, and some of them will be asking questions. And our club president, Linda Nearing, is not able to be on, also because of internet difficulties. We would like to start now with Norberto Santana. Thank you very much, Norberto.
Absolutely. Allan, did you want to start with a question, or did you want me to?
Sure. I'd be glad to. First, I want to echo Sue's welcome to the Laguna Woods Democratic Club, and thank you for taking your time to speak with us today. And I guess the first thing I'd like to start out with is I guess the personal, go from the personal to the general. And I'd like to know a little bit about you, how you came to journalism. I understand you wrote in the Orange County Register, but how'd you come to nonprofit media and the Voice of OC? How'd you get here? What was your journey like?
You know, a long journey. I grew up in Southern California, Whittier, Pico Rivera area over in LA County. My parents were Cuban refugees, came over in the early 1960s. I was part of that first generation born in this country. I can speak English and Spanish. I grew up in a very Latino neighborhood in Whittier, Southeast Whittier. Eventually went to USC and studied political science. Like a lot of young people, tried to find my way. Eventually found newspapering. I really enjoy the quickness of newspapering. A lot of times as a political scientist, what I was trained in at SC, one of the difficult aspects of that is that you have to wait for history to happen and then you go study it. What I always enjoyed about journalism was its ability to impact things as they happened and not wait for things to go wrong. In fact, I think it's one of the great ills of American journalism, that especially investigative journalism, that we wait for things to go wrong and then we go in and tell you how bad it all is. And I think always the question of the reader is, where were you while all this was happening? So anyway, I got a master's in Latin American studies while I was in San Diego, from San Diego State. I worked there at many different newspapers. During the riots, I wrote a lot of stories as a student that ended up netting me a fellowship to Washington, D.C. And I went back there and lived in D.C. for about 7 years and worked both as an analyst in Latin America, looking at National Endowment for Democracy programs and kind of asking ourselves, what makes a better democracy? Is it press? Is it civil institutions? Is it a Congress? Is it separation of powers? Both as a journalist and a political scientist, that's always fascinated me, especially given my family history of my parents coming from Cuba, and essentially talking to us all the time about what happens when a civil society breaks apart and sort of what comes. I've always covered government. When I was in DC, after working with many activists and dissidents in Latin America, I transferred to begin to do more journalism and worked at Congressional Quarterly and spent about 3-4 years covering Congress and just covered the US Senate, covered House action, really got good about figuring out how the process of politics works. And then frankly started asking myself some hard questions about, you know, wait a minute, I've seen this debate before, you know, about what happens with Israel versus Egypt aid. And the one thing that I noticed on, you pick your issue, the votes are very similar and the issues continue again and again and again. It really made me wonder as a journalist, what was it that we were seeing in Washington, D.C., whether it was an entertainment show that didn't have that much impact on people's quality of life back home. After about 6 winters in Washington, D.C., I really started pining for Southern California and wanted to, and essentially come back home to my family and to the communities that I grew up in, and that I feel that it's really never been very well covered by American journalism. To American journalism, there is nothing past the Mississippi. I mean, it's you look at one institution after another in American journalism, and the West Coast is never represented at all. It's a very broken sort of coverage model journalistically out here. So anyway, I came back. When I left DC, I went to go work in the U.S. Virgin Islands. I worked there for a year and covered the governor and the Senate. Won a couple of awards there that brought me back to Southern California. And when you're a young journalist, you tend to be a little bit like a baseball player. You work on one team and you try to do as well as you can, and you move up in different markets. I went to the San Bernardino County Sun. After that, I went to the San Diego Union Tribune, where I started to get more and more in investigations. Over time, as a reporter, what I always found, every reporter has their specialty, let's say. Some are very good writers, some are very good researchers. I always naturally, I don't know why, gravitated towards investigations. You're gravitated towards, what is this? 2 and 2 is 4. I don't have to say, she said 2 and 2 is 4. 2 and 2 is 4. You know, there's certain things in American journalism that it gets treated like, well, this side said this and this side says that. Investigative journalism, the beauty of it is going to the actual granular level and saying, no, wait a minute, this isn't he said or she said. This is what the truth is about this. Covering municipalities in Southern California, to me, has always been a deep honor, because a type of reporting that you do has an immediate impact. Sometimes I think the national reporting that we see is frankly more and more part of an entertainment show that is not really aimed at improving anybody's quality of life, but just sort of entertaining people with politics. I think in large part, that's why I moved in after I came to the Orange County Register and I covered the county government back in about 2009 during the last great economic crisis we had. This is when I began to sort of ask some questions as an investigative reporter. Wait a minute, you know, there's certain stories that we don't ever do. And there's certain stories that we don't do while they're developing. We only show up as investigative reporters when it's all blown up. What would happen to a model that actually would put people in the driver's seat to actually impact their politics, so that we didn't have to wait for everything to be destroyed, or our politics wasn't some entertainment show where we're tracking elections that at the end of the day, I can tell you as a reporter, I think have less and less and less impact on your quality of life. I started to say a long time ago as a reporter, it's like, I don't care who wins the election, Democrat, Republican, whoever wins, I have a host of uncomfortable questions for you when you finish your election victory and we get to work. So that's, in some ways, back in 2009, I was at the Register and I was listening to, I don't know, the 4th or 5th publisher come forward with plans that frankly made no sense to me at all. And if I had had a local mayor showing me that of their local budget, I would have, you know, basically diced it all up. That's when I frankly asked myself some hard questions about the state of media, and do we just keep running around the edges, you know, writing about disasters and never getting to things that actually change anything with transportation policy, healthcare policy. I mean, you name it. There's a host of different things that your local government does that I saw over the last 20 years in Southern California of covering local governments. And if anything, I became more and more worried that as you were covering governments, you started to notice as a reporter, it's like being an engine mechanic. You're like, wait a minute, you know, I'm not seeing anymore a Democrat take on a Republican. I'm not seeing anymore a Democrat check a Democrat. I'm not seeing anymore the city manager check the council or the CEO check the county supervisors. I'm not seeing anybody check anybody, because I'm beginning to suspect that everybody's cutting deals with each other, and we just kind of keep doubling down on the same decisions, whether it's transportation, healthcare, environment, you name it, and the same problems persist year after year after year. So I started asking myself a question as a journalist. Maybe, you know, this corporate model of journalism isn't the way to go long term. I had been blessed that I had had some friends in San Diego that had set up the Voice of San Diego, and I knew them very, very well. And I had thought for a while that one paper I worked at, Congressional Quarterly in Washington, D.C., is a nonprofit, or was a nonprofit during those days. And I thought, you know what, if you take out advertising from the whole thing and act like an engine mechanic, maybe you end up with better journalism. And that was the road that we started on in 2009. You know, let's not go towards advertising. Let's not go to entertain people. Let's go to engage people. And maybe if you have a model that if you engage people enough around their local community, they will simply, in a sense, donate. They will subscribe automatically to a news source that does that. And I think the numbers have proved us out on that. I mean, we are very underfunded. I mean, when we started Voice of OC, it was literally, I think we started with about $100,000 start grant just to see if it would work. And we kind of, I liken it all the time to that movie Tucker a bit, or a race car that we've been putting together in a barn, little by little by little, putting some doors on it, putting a windshield on it. But the core has worked from day one, which is if you give people the right information in real time, they make intelligent decisions every single time. They hold their officials accountable because they have the material to do so. People are very, very smart. It's one thing my father, who's the best political analyst I ever dealt with, taught me all the time is never doubt the inherent intelligence and wisdom of people. And if you present them with adequate information, they make pretty good choices. The problem, I think, is that we are not getting adequate information ahead of decisions. You constantly get it afterwards. And I think if anything, what that is doing in our country is depressing people to the point that they just check out because it's just one negative story after another. There's other aspects of for-profit media that I have found incredibly troubling over the years. Things like police and courts coverage that increasingly paints one segment of your community in a very bad light. And not to say you don't cover crime in courts, but what I know as a reporter being in a newsroom is that it's cheap to cover that. And that's why you see so much of crime in courts, because it's cheap to produce. And newsrooms in large part have disavowed themselves from the impacts of that, of creating the need that when you guys watch your TV news at night, the first thing you say is, my God, we need more police. Because you're seeing so much of this stuff that it creates that kind of like pull on it. Then the politician has to react to that call saying, oh my God, we need more police. What do? Well, the way to get reelected is to fund more police. It's an easy decision. The police unions have a lot of money, as do the firefighters. So this is where you keep getting this type of government, where you have fire departments that 90% of their calls are EMS. You have sheriff's departments that most of them are in the jails, not out in patrols. I don't think I've ever seen a city council ever ask a question of the local police chief. What was our crime last month? Who was arrested? How? Why? What part of town? What happened to them? Were the arrests correct? Did you make any mistakes? Never. Ask yourself what kind of a business that you could run week after week, month after month, year after year, and never ask a question about overtime, never ask a question about use of force, never quite ask a question about risk management payouts. Zero. Now, this year, we see a lot of this coming to a head about how we manage our quality of life.
Well, it's obvious from what you said that the voice vote, which was going to be my next question, but the voice vote C is local or regional, however you want to call it. It's really, I look at it and I think it's more regional than local, covers really all of Orange County. But this isn't what's called nonprofit media. And that is actually different. It's different in structure, all the structures. It's different legally than for-profit media too. There's certain things you can and can't do. I think because when we think of nonprofit media, I think a lot of people, they know the giants. Corporation Public Broadcasting is nonprofit. NPR is nonprofit. The Pacifica Foundation. But I think a lot of times people get it confused also with what at least we used to call alternative media, which is, that's not necessarily not for profit. They probably didn't make any money, but they don't have the restrictions. So I guess that's how does nonprofit media differ from for-profit media? What are some of the things you can do and can't do as opposed to for-profit media?
Well, the one thing, the real only restriction that we have, which I think is a blessing, which is we can't get involved in sort of partisan races. We cannot, as a 501c3, we are here to educate people. So we're not here to get involved in politics. So you won't see us issue endorsements, something that I think the paper should never be doing anyway. I don't think the same person that brings to you the news should be telling you who to vote for. I think that those two should be separated. That's kind of like the big wall in nonprofit media. When we started the nonprofit media movement back in about 2009, when we were one of the first agencies to come out in the country, the Knight Foundation had said, basically, we see this problem coming. And maybe I saw this all the time as a reporter. When you come up and you ask certain questions and you're asking about, a big advertiser at the paper, you can see it in the editor's eyes. You can see it in the publisher's eyes. The idea of nonprofit media, and as you said, there's a couple like PBS and NPR that are nonprofit. The idea being is that you don't want your engine mechanic to tell you the blue or the red solution to anything. You just want to know what's wrong, what's it take to fix it, and what are the implications? Because that's one thing about government that I've learned, at least over the 30 years of covering it. there's not necessarily good and bad. There's choices and implications of those choices. Do this and you will get that, but you will also get a lot of other things. And so it's like weeding your garden. You have to be out there constantly. The difference of nonprofit media to for-profit media is that for-profit media is really there to make a profit. I mean, when I started Voice, I had a couple of board members say to me like, okay, we do this and then we sell it, right? And it's like, no, we don't. It's just here for the community. We establish it. And then there's a board that in a sense ensures that its longevity is taken care of. So for example, I teach at Chapman University. One of the things that we've tried to do a lot with our nonprofit newsroom is to utilize it so at a place where local kids that are coming out of college have a way to learn and sort of like cover their communities. And that again, our bottom line is not to make a profit. See, that to me is the most dangerous aspect of news, to make profit. If I'm trying to entertain you, I'm not going to try to inform you. I'm trying to entertain you. I'm by nature of that, I'm going to go grab two extremes of anything and let them kind of butt heads a little bit. That's what like YouTube has been great at. But when it comes to your civic life, I couldn't think of a more dangerous way to cover it. And I think that what's happening at the national scale in a lot of ways is the culmination of what's been happening at the local level for 20 years. You've been surrounded by, in a sense, Donald Trumps everywhere, in a sense that you have politicians that don't tell you the truth. They don't tell you, both from a Democratic side or from a Republican side, what they're really doing. And you have a news media for the longest period that also doesn't delve in because of its fear of losing access. One of the things that we did with Voice of OC from day one was to give it an investigative approach, being the idea of like, I'm not here to be the spokesperson or the assistant for elected officials and help them get their message out. That's their job, and they have budgets to do that. I'm here to hold them accountable. That's what a reporter should be able to do, in a respectful way, in a nonpartisan way, but in a professional way. And I think that in some ways, the for-profit media has really lost its way in a lot of ways. In the scramble to make money, they have not differentiated between sports coverage or entertainment coverage and civic coverage. They're not in the civic trenches enough. So as a nonprofit, I don't ask myself, well, we've already written a kind of those homeless stories. We should kind of get off that and go entertain people with some kind of different civic news. It's very liberating to be able to look at our civic life like a mechanic and say, as you were asking, Allan, earlier, what races are coming up in November? Okay, how are we going to cover those? Where are we going to look at the money in those races? What are the issues affecting that community? In fact, one of the things that we ask ourselves a lot, and I don't know that we always do a great job at it, but we're trying, is to say, let's ask questions about people's quality of life. What will you do for my traffic commute back and forth to work or home? What will you do to fund better senior centers? What will you do to give me better and more well-funded parks and after-school programs for kids? All of those kind of questions that if you think about it, when's the last time you heard your media ask those kind of questions, as opposed to just concentrate on horse race and entertaining aspects of, you only hear about certain politicians if there's a crisis or if there's a sex scandal. That is really a dangerous way, I think. And that's why, I put my life on the line back in 2009 to say, if we don't have this kind of coverage, our democracy is going to blow up. And frankly, again, being the child of Cuban parents, I grew up with these stories again and again and again about what happened to them in Cuba, how their society just sort of basically collapsed. Their political system rotted from the inside out to the point where it just basically collapsed. It is something that, especially in these last 10 years, has worried me more and more, because I would tell you that your local offices have been taken over by politicians more and more and more and more. And your professional staffs at these cities, at the county, respond to these politicians more and more and more and more. And I think in large part it's because there's not a media environment around holding everybody accountable in a professional manner, that they know it's like going to the dentist. You will be back to see me again. I will be there at the next council meeting. I will be there at the next supervisors meeting. And one thing we've tried to do is not cover it with a point of view. In recent years, I started writing a bit more of a column as publisher and also as editor-in-chief. What we've tried to do too is to keep those two roles together, so that our monetization strategy, which is largely funded on readers, institutions, foundations, is consistent with our coverage approach, which is, again, to engage and inform and put all of you in a position to make the best choices based on your own your own approach to government, whether you like a bigger government, a more limited one, you have a particular interest in certain interests, ask yourselves all, how good of an aspect do you have of figuring out your local parks and how they're financed, your local roads, and why you get, not detached bike lanes. You get tiny little bike lanes with a white line in the middle of a road that's supposed to keep a 6,000-pound machine from crushing an individual, right? And we all just kind of go like, okay, that's the best that our government can do. Those, I think, are the questions that we're not asking enough at the local level.
Yeah, I agree with you. I just want to ask you one more specific question about the Voice of OC, and then because I thought a lot of interesting things that you've been saying, I want to delve into them. I really do. But I just from the Voice of OC, the reporters that you have. I know you have reporters. You have people who write opinion columns, and you have. I saw Dr. Jose Marino, I think it was today, co-authored I guess we'd call it an op-ed or whatever, in there. But where do the people who actually report the news? I see the same names over and over again mostly. Do you have a staff of reporters? Just how do you go about actually gathering the news?
We do. We have a budget of about $500,000 a year. We have put a lot of effort into training interns. The idea being is that part of the problem of a news agency is that it gets to this problem of how do you finance it? How do you have reporters? So we started off only with reporters. We didn't have an op-ed section. We didn't run press releases. I really liken this to a community newsroom that's been built step by step by step by step. Old friends of mine at the Register where I used to work used to tell me that if you took your American newsroom and you boiled it down to its essence, its core, what is absolutely necessary, you'd have Voice of OC. You'd have, in a sense, coverage of these city halls, the counties. What I found as a teacher and a professor of journalism as well is that you could not ask for a better training ground for your younger reporters than to go cover city council meetings and learn how processes work, learn how budgets work. When we started this off, one of our first reporters that we had was Adam Almerac, who is now at the Los Angeles Times, and he is an investigative specialist on municipal corruption. I don't think I've ever seen a reporter go from a tiny nonprofit newsroom to the LA Times in one jump. But it's because of the training that he and others have been able to get at Voice of OC. We have experienced reporters. This year, it saddens me to say that we lost Tracy Wood, a brilliant investigative reporter and mentor that we had. I mean, she was one of the first female combat correspondents in Vietnam. Just as tough as nails and a great teacher. Tracy did a wonderful job taking on, basically we set up an intern program from day one. We went to the local colleges. We tried to find the most sort of interested in investigative approaches. And we've consistently found young people that we've trained. I mean, you'll see there, every reporter that you see at the Voice of OC started as an intern. So whether it's Adam Almerac, Nick Gerda, who now covers the county government for us. Nick's been with us, I think, almost 8 years and has literally learned from the smallest city councils to now covering the county government. Spencer Custodio is another intern of ours that was up in Fullerton. He now covers a lot of our North County cities for us and does an amazing job. He does a daily update on the coronavirus numbers and what the latest news are. And he's just, like I said, I call him the James Brown of our newsroom. He just, cranks out dailies every day. Our model is also very much on dailies. Our reporters learn by being in the trenches. The officials learn that with our reporters, it's not like for-profit media where they come in, do a story, and then leave, right? The advantage of having younger reporters that are there, that are working as interns, is that they are there covering a city council. And for them, it's not like, well, I don't want to go cover Laguna Woods. I don't want to go over to Laguna Hills. They do it, really, having a great time and learning tons. Right now, we have 2 other interns that we took on as fellows. We started once we had fellows, or once we had interns, then we found that the interns didn't want to leave and they wanted to keep working. So then we had to set up a fellow program to pay them small stipends and kind of keep training them. Our senior reporters, others, TiVo, who covered Central Orange County for a long time, moved up north to the San Jose Mercury News. These days, I don't think I've lost another reporter. Most of them don't want to leave. It's, they can, in our model, what they find is that they can go after what is needed to go after. It's not a matter of entertaining people. So they are able to have a very workmanlike approach to what these city councils are doing. And the main emphasis that I have given them and that the board of directors has given them as well, which is we are here to cover Orange County. I'm not interested in national races. Frankly, I'm not even interested in state races that much. What I am interested in is Orange County's quality of life at the hyper local level. Now, Allan, you make a great point. We kind of cover it on a regional basis because what we're trying to do, for the longest time, we started in Santa Ana and Anaheim with the idea that the largest cities really should be covered. And that would be, some of the most important things. Very quickly, we got people all over the county asking, when are you coming to Laguna Woods? When are you going to cover Laguna Hills? When are you coming to San Clemente? And frankly, what I think we've found over years is that every single city has tons of issues. You don't know about it because you're not asking the questions and you don't have any engine mechanics running over there. But almost every city that we look at, whether it's Mission Viejo, San Clemente, Laguna Niguel, places that you would think are very well run and no problem, when you start taking a look at them, you find that, like any place, government, it's like watching sausage being made. It's not a pretty process, but it doesn't have to be. I mean, in some ways, too, what you see on governing dioceses, because of the Brown Act and other things, you want to have very frank discussions up there. So anyway, that's, in large part where the reporters have learned. When there's an election, the reporters jump on them. And they do, now after covering the local city councils, they're actually in pretty good shape to be asking the politicians and others questions about how will you impact our quality of life. I will tell you that I still think we've not gotten there. I mean, we have a very small staff at Voice, and we all work pretty hard to stay in front of the civic agenda. Our governing or approach has always been, let's do journalism that puts residents in a position to protect their quality of life and to have each community make the decisions that best fit them. And one of the things that I don't think you want to have in news, you don't want me lecturing to you about anything. What you want me giving you as an engine mechanic, it's like your car mechanic would do, is to come back and say, here are your issues. Here's where you can use your park money, or you can use it all on police. One of the things that we've noticed over the years, and this is where I think the modern media is largely responsible for this, is that you see this thing that feeds on itself. The local evening broadcast brings you Fallujah in Orange County. Crime, 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 crime. The resident goes, oh my gosh, we need more cops. Politician says, no problem. That's the easiest decision to make at all because they give me lots of campaign money. So what do you end up with? You end up with largely police states where 50, 60% of your general funds are being spent on police. Ask yourself a question. What is happening in places like Mission Viejo, San Clemente, San Juan Capistrano, Lake Forest, Laguna Niguel? These are all in South County, very much oftentimes referred to as the safest communities in America. And if you think that that's the case because they have a large police force, I mean, Oakland has a large police force, right? Santa Ana has a large police force. That's not necessarily the way to enhance public safety. Now, I'm not anti-police at all. You absolutely have a need for that. One of the examples it teaches me, I was trained in a Salesian Catholic high school, a trade school, where I was trained as a machinist. And when I was a machinist in our shops, if you had a hammer out, you had a priest on you in 2 minutes, and the priest would come up and say to you, what are you doing? And you'd say, well, I've got this screw and I put it in and it's about 3/4 of the way in and it's kind of a little stuck. So I'm gonna give it a little bang and just kind of get it in. And the priest, I'll never forget this, would always say to me, or to us, hang on a minute, ask yourself a question. When you need to use a hammer is a great tool, but whatever it bangs into place will never come out again. So ask yourself, do you really need the hammer? And in that case, and I'll never forget it, the priest would say to me, take the screw out, wipe it with the rag, now try it. Now you see that with hand power, it works no problem. And as he would say, a hammer is a wonderful tool, but you can't walk around with a toolbox just full of hammers. You need a lot of different things to enhance public safety. Thankfully, we have good tax bases here in America, and all of our cities are pretty well financed. But again, if you go ask your local city, wherever that may be, how is it actually spent? I think you'll be shocked. In fact, you'll even be shocked at the reaction you start to ask.
It's true even here in Laguna Woods, when we speak about the homeowners association funds, they always say, well, one of the biggest expenses is the sheriff's department. But there's, what is that, 5 incidents of crime here a year? So I see what you mean on that. What I'd like to do now is to pick up on some of the things that you had said previously and see if we can expand on those, because I really found them interesting. And one of the things I'm going to go back to, you when you first started, you said 2 and 2 plus 2 is always 4, talking about accuracy. And I noticed when I read your, I don't know if it would be the mission statement, but you had accuracy, not objectivity, is one of the things that you were going for in this, and I'd like you to talk about that. And the couple of things that I'm thinking of, just to start it off, tell people what I'm thinking of, is two things that happened just last week at Fox. They always seem to be the big offender, not because we're all lefties here, but maybe that does have something to do with it. But they added images to enhance their narrative line. They added an image of a armed black man standing in front of a burning building, and said it was in a story about the demonstrations in Minneapolis, insinuating that was part of it. It wasn't. That was an added image. They also did the same thing in the area where there's no police in Seattle. They showed videotape of that, and they added some videotape from someplace else as of people rioting or running from the police. And, just adding to their narrative. This is the story. Finding a story and putting the evidence in there, whether it was real or not. And I also want to go back to way back to when you founded the Voice of OC, 2009, 2010, when the birther movement first started. If you remember, the articles were always so-and-so claims that the president was actually born in Kenya. And the next paragraph would say the president denies this. It took almost 8 years for them to at least start saying there's no evidence of this. I guess the difference in the importance of accuracy as opposed to telling both sides of the story. One side may be true, one side may not be true. I'd be interested in what you think about that.
You're 100% correct. That is the problem of American journalism, is this fake objectivity. Whereas you said, this side says this side says that. Well, who knows? I've told my reporters a million times, you are here to write with authority. Now, that's why you research things. And also, when you cover things again and again and again, you can begin to write with authority, because it's like, no, I can say that what you said is not true and is not relevant. The other problem, as you mentioned, with Fox and other TV stations, especially TV, is challenging, because if you think about it, it's the mediums that work, right? But in radio, you're going with a voice. In TV, you need visuals, right? And again, it goes back to this idea of entertaining you with coverage, right? This is what Fox does great. Boom, beam, bam, boom, beam, bam, 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 right? And as a reporter, if you put me into that situation, that coverage mentality, I'm going to try to grab the most compelling visual that I can to my little news kernel, right? In nonprofit media, it's like I tell the reporters, go into the batter's box, a double will get you into the Hall of Fame. You don't have to hit home runs every day. We're not looking for photos that go with the story that will make it go. If anything, we want them to be accurate, because when the reader sees that photo, sees that headline, sees the lead, that's why you'll see in our coverage, for example, if I tell you something and state it as an authoritative fact, I will include a link to the document that you can go check it. And you can see if I described it the way that you would or not, right? And you could say, well, I see a little bias here, the way that, these people are seeing it. Sometimes we've gotten heat from officials that they'll say, well, you guys are opinionated. And it's like, well, it's not opinionated when I tell you that 2 and 2 is not 5. That's not my opinion. That's fact. Now, here's the difference. In order to be able to ascertain facts like that, you need to do a lot of work as a reporter. You can't just show up at the last minute and put a microphone in front of somebody and let them say whatever they want to say. That's where it's very hard. And I would tell you that here in Orange County, we've taken a lot of heat from Democrats and Republican officials that do not like it when we stand in front of them, whether it's in Anaheim, whether it's in Santa Ana, whether it's about police review commissions or about a gate tax on Disney. And we say, here's what the facts tell us. Here's what you're doing. Or when the county government, when we tell them, you're not telling the truth on the coronavirus. I mean, think about, well, it's mostly nursing homes. Mostly nursing homes. As if deaths in a nursing home don't matter. Yeah. We don't need to drill in deeper to that. And let's assume that, okay, 40% is nursing home, and we don't care about those people because they're dead anyway, or, that's the message coming out of the county government. Well, what about the 60% that aren't in nursing homes? Where are they at? What's happening out there? And what you will find again and again and again, your county government is a $6 billion entity, and it cannot pull off a press conference. Here in Orange County, a huge embarrassment. They have a once-a-week press conference on coronavirus, something that is killing thousands of people, right? Or has already infected, tens of thousands, right? And they have a press conference one a week, and you get one question as a reporter. I mean, think about that. In Orange County, there's the Times, there's the Register, there's us. But the county government, a $6 billion bureaucracy, does not have the ability to have a a 2-hour press conference or a 3-hour press conference or just a discussion that you all as residents can do because they're too afraid to walk into a room and have reporters ask them real questions and say, how come you list less deaths than the state does? Why is that? Why would you choose a data set that is less reliable than one that is more reliable? Gee, could it be that you don't want people to know what the real numbers are? Now, that's an inference that you have to make, but the facts are the facts. What we have found over time is that has resonated with people. Just like when we started Voice, we figured if you give people the facts, they will recognize it. And again, in all of our stories, the source documentations are always highlighted. So you don't have to trust our reporters. It's that thing of trust but verify. Go to the links, see the original reports. So I think that's something that we go to great lengths. And again, our aim is not to entertain you. It's to engage you. It's to equip you with the information and the tools that you need as residents to make a decision. Our original, let's say, business plan was, if you do that, if you go straight to the reader and you stop fooling around with advertisers or corporate sponsors, because you can see how that works. It doesn't, right? It doesn't even monetize that well. If you go directly to the reader, there is a real relationship that can actually go and change a policy here, if that makes sense. Did you want to follow up on that, Allan?
I do. And I just want to. Well, yeah, I will. We're gonna get questions. Anybody who has questions should put them on chat right now, and we'll get to them. I just have one other thing that I want to pick up on from what you were talking about, because it's something I've been thinking about also. You were talking earlier about civil society, and not necessarily in our context right now, but I think you were talking about it more in context of what happened in Cuba and so forth. But I look at what's happening too, and I see a breakdown of civil society here, and I see it as like we're victims of 30 years of propaganda, 40 years of propaganda. We've been told for 40 years that if the government is doing it, it's not good, that it's ineffective, all these things are ineffective. And we turned our back on our institutions. That's the way it looks to me. And that's why we see the Los Angeles City Council in the shape that it's in now. And closer to home here, we hardly hear about it anymore, but the sheriff's department and the district attorney's office here in Orange County, they're disaster areas. And they could end up releasing, because of their malfeasance and lies, they could end up having to release who knows how many serious criminals back onto Orange County, and people could start suing them for violating their constitutional rights, and it cost us literally hundreds of millions of dollars down the road. But we don't hear about it because we turn our back on it. That's the way I look at it. We don't believe in it anymore. It's like every place is going to be like those small industrial towns south of Los Angeles, where population of 50, 45 of them related, 40 work for the city, and they all make over $100,000 for winding a 7-day clock, as my father used to say. So what do you think about the civil society here? Do you think it has what it takes to stand up to the onslaught, or are we in danger of slipping a different way? And then we'll get to the questions on politics and questions that people have from who are watching.
Listen, it's a great question. When I was an analyst for the National Endowment for Democracy and I went to Latin America, we asked ourselves a question always: what enhances democracy? What doesn't, right? And you started looking around. After doing that for 3 or 4 years, I came away with this thought of what makes a democracy is civil institutions, whether it's the Democratic Club, the Republican Club, the Kiwanis, the Rotary, the Library Association. In a lot of ways, we have great foundations in this country of citizen involvement, of constantly revising our system. You see a lot about the Black Lives Matter movement today is a matter of, actually paying attention to our ideals and holding ourselves accountable to that. But you're also right. Democracy is kind of like a garden. If you do not weed it every day, it's a constant effort. And you're right. I fear that, as you said, I think that we are, in a sense, benefiting off of the legacy that former generations gave us. People that got grand juries, for example. The grand jury today can't find people to serve, and when they go over there, they're sometimes aggressive, sometimes not aggressive. But that's an institution that activists left you from 100 years ago. Things like the EPA, the Endangered Species Act, all of these things that were left to us by a former generation that fought really, really hard. And I do think that there's a point that you make here, and this is what I think media is one of the biggest problems. I mean, right now there's a movement going on at the LA Times with Black reporters talking about how discriminated they are. And that's at the supposed liberal LA Times, where I think it was, you know how many Black reporters they have at the LA Times? One. And the LA Times. Now, why is that? That's not an accident. That's a willful choice to not want to go cover certain communities because it will bring back uncomfortable truths. And that's not good for advertising. That's not good for the bottom line. Same thing for these public sector executives. You talk to these people who make 250 grand a year and you say, why aren't you standing up to the supervisors when they, make statements about masks or our hospitalization numbers that are absolute lies? And what you get back from this, they're cowards. They are not willing to stand up. So that's why in a lot of ways, self-government, we need, in a sense, more institutions like what you guys are doing, having these discussions. We need more nonprofit media to bring you the information. One thing I will tell you this again and again and again, that is my great faith in this country and the people of this country, is that when you give people information, they are reasonable. They are moderate. They are intelligent. They know how to hold their officials accountable. That's why their officials go to such trouble to not give you the information, to not go to Laguna Woods, ask your officials there, what was the overtime bill for last month? And I will tell you this, just by asking about it, you will bring it down by 20% naturally. I mean, it's like anything, but ask yourself, when's the last time that anybody asked, how much overtime did we pay last month to sheriff deputies, and why? I mean, was it legitimate? Was there a couple of responses that required it? But if you checked it, it's like, when I was a kid, the old days when you used to have a ticker tape at the grocery market, my mom would sit there with a pen and check off every single last thing. And it was the most embarrassing thing I'd ever been through. I always tell my mom, I can't believe you're doing this. But she would say to me again, and she was right, nobody else is paying for my groceries. And almost every time she'd find something, all the time. It's, expect what you inspect. So this is the problem, is that we're not participating enough. That's the problem. In some ways, it's us. And we're allowing corporations and bullshitting politicians to sell you an idea that everything is just okay. Don't worry about it. Go back to your video game. Go back to your poker party. Go back to your hobbies. Just don't pay attention over here. But I think what you see again is that where you see people push, and look at all the young people, pushing. Now, ask yourself a question. In Santa Ana, that's a council that is supposedly all progressive, all Democratic, right? And yet, after all these kids came out, what did that city council do? They doubled down on the same police state funding a month ago. And that's after all these protests, everything that's happened, and 9 progressive Democrats. They just recalled one Republican who was the only person asking, again, questions. Just why are we spending this much money? Do you need to spend that much money on a police officer? And even if you are, with the pension liabilities given that the way they are, you're not really getting even more people on the ground, which is your basic supposition for doing this. So again, information is power. In this country, you have a great legacy left to you by a generation of activists and others that go back, 200 years. That is, I think, something that maybe in schools is just not being taught the same way, that people come out and say, you have been handed, this massive, huge diamond of self-government, right? It's beautiful. All you have to do is just kind of shine it and just keep it up. Don't let it go away. And I do fear that in some ways, if you get it too good, this is what happens. And I think what you're seeing today is a sort of an eroding of a lot of those institutions. I do fear for our country in that.
Yeah, we seem to be squandering our inheritance when it comes to this stuff, definitely. I want to get into some now, I guess, politics. And I want to start, somebody raised a question, which I think is an excellent question, to start with the Board of Supervisors here in Orange County. And you got to wonder, with that whole thing with the health officer, I mean, profile in cowardice or profile in ignorance. I can't tell which is which, but what do you think happened there? I mean, I mean, if you think about it, it's the height of absurdity. I think they're responding. I understand there were people there. I understand they can get demonstrations, but they're responding. If you look at the public opinion surveys, they're responding to something that doesn't exist. They're responding to pressure that doesn't exist. People realize it's good to wear masks. People realize you shouldn't be in crowds. People realize, and if they didn't then, they certainly are this week, that this pandemic is not over. It's raging about, and we're all in danger from it. But what do you think happened with the Board of Supervisors, and why they not only didn't back their health agent, but just kind of talk about throwing somebody over to the bus? They couldn't even protect her from death threats. So what do you think happened there?
Well, I think it's the continued decay of the Board of Supervisors, where you have an entertainment show up there, and these guys are running for office, both of the most vocal people. Well, Don Wagner, I don't know why these people, they have their positions. He already has run for office, so he's not facing re-election right now. Michelle Steele is facing re-election. You have a highly politicized county government right now. Whenever these people are facing election, why do you think it's no accident that you see Michelle Steele and Andrew Doe are the two spokespeople, and every single press conference starts with them, even though they have nothing to add? So it's like, as reporters, we have a 1-hour press conference, and you got to listen to Michelle Steele for 15 minutes, say nothing, and then leave, not even take questions. So I think this is the culmination of 10 years. In short, with Dr. Quick, I think what happened was there's a serious push here. You have two competing issues. You have public health, a tragedy going on, but you also have an economic tragedy going on. And there's real fear about, like, how long can we stay closed? How long can we all stay home? You know, how do we get, in a sense, back to normal? So there's this real push, especially from business people that are trying to keep their doors open. I think in some ways, county supervisors are reacting to that. But again, they just don't want to do things in a methodical kind of way. So what did they do? Right before Memorial Day, they rush into reopening everything, because all they want is the headline that says, I got everything reopened for you, right? It's like your mechanic saying, just slap those wheels on with some glue. I'll get you on the road. And what happens after I get you on the road, that's up to you. Crazy. So what do? Right before Memorial Day, I think it was on a Friday, they announced everything's opening up. I remember, because I remember looking at my reporters going like, this is the craziest thing on earth. We're all exhausted here. And now you're asking me to interpret health orders and others. I would tell you that there's been confusion with every single health order that they have issued. And it's not so much because the health orders have not been written correctly. We've never gotten them wrong, but it's because there's no public information effort at the county. There is no interest in informing you guys about what's really going on and the complexity of it all. So what do? This Nicole Quick, the doctor, on Friday night, I think her order, the mask order, went out on a Saturday morning. Who in their right mind issues something that big on a Saturday morning? And just, I know what we'll do. Let's just let it out there and let social media figure it out. Well, that's what happened. I mean, you put it out really late, and I think, and I don't know this for a fact, but I think that the doctor, given that she's a real medical doctor, said, I can't in good conscience sign off on all these openings without putting in a mask order at the same time, because people will die. And I think that the politicians, in some ways, they are surrounded by such cowardice of these well-paid executives who do not have, the courage to just simply stand up and say, listen, you can do this, but you've got to do it in a certain way, or it's not going to turn out well. There's just not a lot of thoughtfulness there. That county board is in campaign mode almost constantly. And given that the media environment is so weak around them, I can see kind of why they operate that way. But I think, in short, that's what happened. Once the mask order thing started taking off, this doctor, who is not a politician, is not a public sector executive. And remember that she got put in that case because the other public health director had left. 3 of your top healthcare agency directors have all left, like in the last couple of months. And when you ask this county CEO, he's like, well, that's not that big of a thing. And such was older, and such wanted to retire. We had the one getting on death threats. That's true. Now you go flash forward to the Anaheim City Council, where they're asking questions like, why are we being told now, 3 months into this, that West Anaheim is being ravaged by coronavirus, right? 3 months into it, these people have held on to these numbers and held on to these numbers. There seems to be a real sort of emphasis here that they don't want to tell the public exactly what's going on, because frankly, there's not always, you're not always going to get the answers that you want out of your government, right? It's like these are two competing interests. This is not going to be easy to figure out. But in short, I think that's what happened with Dr. Quick. And then after a while, I don't think she was equipped for the pressure and the politicking. I think everybody saw her at the board and had the county supervisor. Now, granted, I think it's a good thing to have county supervisors asking some hard questions about mask orders, beach closures, golf course closures, Why is this necessary? What do we know about the science? I mean, that part I think is really good, to have different questions and even hard questioning. I don't think is a problem, but notice that there's no other questioning, right? I mean, Michelle Steele in that case and Don Wagner had serious concerns, and there was a constituency that they spoke to, but the others just sat there quietly and didn't say anything at all.
You also have to be willing to listen to the answers when you ask the questions.
Yeah.
Which I'm always think, I'm going to make a jump right now because we're running a little short of time here. We're getting to be a little short time. I want to ask you about a race, your take on a race here that's near and dear to our hearts, and here in Laguna Woods and around the area, the state Senate race. Dave Min, who's run for Congress before, he's well known here, running against John Morlock, the incumbent state senator for our district here. Just how you see that race. Do you think that's a viable race? Do you see it leaning anyway, or just your comments on it?
Yeah, a super interesting race. I mean, John has been in office for a while. He's an economic conservative. I think focuses more on the bottom line of things like pensions, Caltrans. I think the big question there for him would be again, what have you done to enhance the quality of life in your district in a very sort of like workmanlike way? For Dave Min is obviously a little bit more of a moderate Democrat. He went up against Katrina Foley in the primary. Katrina got hit with a massive amount of money from Uber and Lyft on this AB5 thing. So kind of one of these things where just politics is crazy. This other ancillary issue that came into this race had nothing to do with your race or your quality of life at all. But the fact that I guess these companies thought that Katrina would not be friendly towards them, and they really invested a lot of money. The main thing with all these races to be scared of is that look what can happen with just a little bit of targeted mail, how they can move outcomes one way. You don't want to be against this candidate, flood the area with mail where there's no other media, right? And you get this sort of result. The key question I think will be for Dave is, is there enough, does he have enough money there to go up against significant name ID? For John, who's never been known as a very good fundraiser, the question will be can you rise to the challenge in front of you? And sadly, this is what a lot of these races are dependent on, is who's got more money to generate more misleading mail. And this is how we elect our elected officials, which is about the craziest thing that you could possibly do.
Really. And somebody raised a really good question, which I'd like to ask you, which is not really about politics, but about news reporting. But I think it's really important. Is how, as the consumers of all of this, how do we tell if something is real or something is a news story or something is just somebody's social media feed, says somebody, some bot or something trying to lead us down a garden path? Is there any way that we can discern the difference between those, just as people who read Facebook and watch the news and so forth?
Absolutely. It's actually, in some ways, when you think about it, it's quite easy. It's like my brother would say to me, hey, I saw this thing at 2:00 in the morning on TV. Do you think? And I'm like, it's fake. Right. If you saw it at 2:00 in the morning on, Channel 9, it's not, it's like your eyes will tell you exactly what you can depend on, what can be relied on. So for example, look at a headline and ask yourself, does the lead of the story back up that headline? And if it doesn't, you already know that you're dealing with something that's not very credible, right? You mentioned earlier about, is the photo that's up there really jingoistic? And does it match the headline? And does the lead of the story match that photo? And if you begin to see a pattern that, gee, the photo is jingoistic, the headline is jingoistic, the lead is not particularly accurate or backed up, you've just answered your own question, which is you're reading something that's not that credible. And frankly, sometimes you could be reading something that's not that credible in the New York Times, or you can be reading it. Well, actually, I should revise that. There are certain levels of professionalism in journalism that you see that you will not see on social media. But that doesn't mean that you should just accept what your mainstream reporters say anyway, because they also get things wrong. A lot of times, like we just talked about, in the American news industry, it's one of the most racist industries in the country. Only 17% of newspaper editors even answer the annual diversity questionnaire sent out by the American Society of Newspaper Editors. So think about that. Only 17%. Look at the mastheads of the newspapers that you subscribe to and ask yourself, if you don't have a diverse staff, how can you have a really intelligent view of what's happening? The other thing is this, like I was telling you earlier, in our stories, whenever I write something in my lead, I try to link to the documents that will prove that, so that you as a reader have assuredness. It's not me telling you to trust me. It's take a look at it, see what that link goes to. And I would say to you, do the same thing for what you read. Go look at what they are asserting, the facts, and are they linking to anything? And if they're not linking, they're not giving you source documents. The beautiful thing of the internet age is that I can do that for you as a reader, and it helps me build my credibility. So little by little, pay attention to what your eyes are telling you when you're reading something on social media. It's actually very easy to spot kind of problematic news when you know what to look for. It's like listening to a car engine. You know, if you hear a tick, 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 you know.
Right, right. We are running short. I only got about 5 minutes, so I'm just going to throw something at you for kind of a quick answer. And talking about the Board of Supervisors again, this is strictly straight politics here. Andrew Doe, who we would love to see defeated here at the Laguna Woods Democratic Club. Not holding you to that, right? But running against Sergio Contreras in the first. Is that a viable race for the first supervisors district? Is there a chance to defeat Andrew Doe? Is Andrew Doe vulnerable at all?
Yeah, I would think that Andrew Doe should be terrified. I mean, when you look at the gap in voter registration there, if I was a Republican, I'd be terrified. Andrew Doe, just by looking at him on the dais, you can see how terrified he is. I think earlier in the year, they thought they would be running against Santa Ana Mayor Miguel Polito, who has a lot of different issues. That turned out to not be the case. And actually, that was very surprising because Miguel Polito had a lot of mail money going in, and Westminster Councilman Sergio Contreras, frankly, didn't. What he did have was labor helping to do the turnout for him. And that turned out to be like enough. So I would think in a year with Trump and with some of these elements that are going on at the national level, I would think that that central Orange County race, let's also not forget that that's the area being in some ways, you know, really ravaged by coronavirus. So I think that there's questions there. The big question will be is Sergio enough of an aggressive campaigner? Can he go out and fundraise money to put out a message? Sometimes in politics, half the battle is there a message? Is there a narrative there against an incumbent or for a challenger? And the other half of the question is, does the challenger or incumbent have the resources to get that message into enough mailboxes to make a difference?
Yeah, this is going to be the last. I'm sorry, this is going to be the last question. I guess we are running out of time, but somebody just posed an excellent question too about public funding in elections. Is that they ask if you've ever done an op-ed about it, but I will expand the question a little bit. Is that something you think is viable? Is that something you think is maybe in our future?
Well, I would tell you that you already have publicly funded campaigns. I don't know why the Board of Supervisors is so against that, because every time that there's a campaign, all of a sudden they issue $200,000 worth of mailers that go out free from the county government, paid by your tax dollars, to help their campaigns out. So in some ways, that you already have a publicly funded campaign system. It's just done on the down low. Right. Is what happens.
Norberto, I'm sorry. I asked you the question. I can't. We don't have time for the answer. My apologies. We have to finish. They're throwing us off the air here. So I just I wanted to thank you very, very much. I really do. I thought you were fascinating. I really thought it was great. I hope everybody enjoyed it. Truly enjoyed it. Your answers as much as I enjoyed asking the questions and listening to your answers. And people should read Voice of OC if you're not familiar with it. I've been reading it for a while, and it really does cover local issues very, very well and in very great detail. And my apologies to people who wrote in questions. Almost every question we got was a good one. Some I know were answered in context, some are left dangling in the air. But again, I just want to thank you very much. Sue can't make it back. We're still having her internet problems, but so I'll wrap up and thank you all. Thank you all for joining us. Norberto Santana Jr., Voice of OC. Thank you so much for being here. I really appreciated taking your time, and the depth of your answers and the details of your answers were really very refreshing. And to everybody who's watching right here, thank you all very much. And we will see you all soon. Bye-bye.